So this is a question I want to direct to all of the panellists, not that you haven't all had a crack at all the other questions already. But if a recommendation of the Royal Commission gets up, which is to, down the track, review and potentially remove the safe harbour provision of the best interest duty, that gets up, what impact do we think that's going to have on the delivery of advice and the way advisors go about the process?
So we were quite surprised with that recommendation. It was interesting to see that it was the only contributor that made that recommendation or that suggestion was ISA. So really surprised that it made it into the final report. We understand it's because of the perception of a ticker box approach. But I don't think it's going to be helpful at all. I think that the safe harbour provides good guidance for advisors to follow. They're already anxious enough as to whether their advice is going to meet ASIC's requirements, and to remove the safe harbour, I think, will just add to uncertainty. It'll mean that more training, more support is required. I think it's going the wrong way.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Phil. I'm a bit torn on this one. I do understand what Ken Haynes is saying in the report. He is concerned about this tick box exercise, and he seems to suggest that it sort of values form over substance, and that if it wasn't there, advisors could just concentrate on putting together a quality financial plan. But at the same time, I'm really big on certainty. As I said before, a lot of these safe harbour steps, except for the last one, I would say you'd put any licensee should make that as part of their advice process anyway. They're just good steps. So, and for advisors to have that certainty is really important. So to remove it and adding more uncertainty, I don't know if we should be going down that path. So I'm torn, but I'd probably end up siding with Phil.
I can see conceptually why people might think that's all you need, but if we don't have the lanes marked out clearly, and the test of that is going to be subjective or objective or evidence-based or court-led, how does anybody protect their own interests running a business, and yet alone how do we make sure we meet the client's needs? So I get it, you know, as a concept it says why do you need the lanes if you're meeting the spirit of the law, but it's so broad, it's just impractical. So I think it's a backward step and it's impractical.
If the issue is tick a box, then there's other ways to solve that rather than to remove the certainty of what's required. I think it's jumping at an issue, but it's not solving the problem.
Well, are we going to have other people sit in judgment over what does and what doesn't meet the duty based on their own opinions or reflections? I'm not accusing of that, but that's the risk we have here of it being opined on in a different form.
Okay, Phil, the way we, and I'm guilty of doing this, refer to the best interest duty, makes it sound often like it's a single sort of standalone obligation, as it were, but there are a number of dimensions to it, aren't there? And I wonder if you could just spend a moment running through what some of the related obligations are that advisors need to be across.
Absolutely. Well, Simon already mentioned that ASIC talk about it as the best interest duty and related obligations. So yes, the best interest duty is central to it. There's also an obligation that the resulting advice must be appropriate to the client. And ASIC tests both of them in terms of whether it's fit for purpose and whether it puts the client in a better position. The third element is this obligation where the information that they've received is either incomplete or inaccurate, to provide a warning that it's incomplete and inaccurate and that the client needs to do their own investigation. The last one is the obligation to prioritise the interests of the client wherever there's conflict with not only the interests of the advisor but interests of related parties to the advisor. And this is a really important one. It certainly plays out in the vertically integrated space as something that they absolutely need to get right. You need to go through the exercise of understanding what the conflicts are. And those conflicts are not just product-related conflicts. There are conflicts such as an incentive to over-service the client that can apply in very much an independent advisor context. So all of these four obligations do work together as a package, and you can't just make sure you comply with one. You've got to comply with all four.
So how are you seeing that emerge in the way files are kept? How does it translate, or how does it look?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, again, so the best interest duty itself should be about your advice process, but ASIC would want to see evidence that you've essentially met the 7 steps, but then separately, if, ultimately there's going to be recommendations. That's sort of the outcome, right? and what they're going to want to see is that explain sort of, it can be more evidence on the file, but explain quite succinctly in the SOA, how is this likely to satisfy your needs and objectives, you, the client, you specifically, and why is this likely to leave you in a better position? So in that sense, again, if the file doesn't contain evidence of the 7 steps and doesn't contain an explanation or justification as to why the advice is likely to leave them in a better position, why the advice is, or how the advice is likely to meet their needs and objectives, specifically also in a replacement product scenario, then ASIC again would say, well, that advice is not appropriate. And the amount of time, and this comes back down to how important record keeping is, the amount of times in a past life when I've had to deal with advisors who've been dragged up in front of ASIC or the FPA or what have you, and when you read the file, it just didn't make any sense. And even to us, we were saying, this is, what's this doing? You'd sit down and chat to the advisor. They'd give you a really clear explanation as to why they did this. And they thought it was appropriate and they were acting in their best interest. There's nothing on the file.
That should be in the file.
Yeah, so it was a fail before we even began, in reality. And whilst we wanted to hear from the advisor, generally speaking, ASIC's not interested in that. It needs to be on the file so that the evidence is there in front of them.
Yeah, got it.